So it is later the same day, and I'm continuing with the same paper, namely a chapter by an anthropologist named Roy Ellen in this 2017 anthology, Human Origins. And the question that we're trying to answer is, what is the origins of humanity, right? What is it that makes us humans, Homo sapiens, as distinct from other hominin species and indeed other kinds of animal? And to answer that question, we were exploring the relationship between our social cognition and natural intelligence, our knowledge of the natural world and how we organize that knowledge. I wanted to notice a couple of things about um, the first sections of the paper that I was already talking about, namely that we see like in other like non-human species, um, chimps, other kinds of apes, monkeys, this ability to categorize, to put in terms of different classes. Give you a couple of examples. Just let me find out. Yeah, so examples like same species, different species, food or not food, toxic or not toxic, male or female, predator or prey. These are like really, really ancient um, categorization abilities. So this ability to see in terms of two, either or. And basically we're hoping to explore um, like what is it about human cognition, human social cognition in relation to the natural world that's different from that? And basically, it has to do with we observed a couple of things. Namely, it's an embodied capacity. Our the evolution of our language, our terminology, our nomenclature for nature itself is always derived from our own body. I'm not going to explore that argument here, simply stating it. We also saw that this, so something about this holding these different classes, categories within ourselves, within the social body, just as much as within our own body, um, becomes really important. What do I mean by that? We saw that this capacity to classify in terms of either or is something that preceded the evolution of our language. So kind of any kinds of these dualities preceded the evolution of our language, came before language. And something that's really unique about the human species, Homo sapiens, is not only our social cognition, like our social intelligence, but the collective intelligence of groups of humans, and particularly the capacity for the categories that are determined, that are given from out of that group, from out of that social body, the capacity of those categories to evolve. So it's a way for the group, the social intelligence of the group, to take certain phenomena and to decide what they are, essentially, which is the same as deciding what to do about them. And it's this capacity, particularly to change the boundaries of different categories, or you could say to alchemize or to transmute or transform these category boundaries. So it's not only this capacity to discriminate, um, to separate or define, to classify, but this capacity to reclassify, to recombine or reweave the stories that we tell about nature. And that's exactly what I've like we see from out of that this co-evolution of our social intelligence with our natural knowledge that I've described in terms of the relationship between three and four in connection with this. which I'm not going to rehash at the moment. I could briefly say, again, I have to say it one time in each video. One becomes two, two becomes three, and from the third comes the one as the fourth, as a way of trying to recover what is it about our humanness that is most essential, could say. Okay, I'm now going to move on into the second aspect, the second part of the essay. And again, we're trying to answer the question, what is it that makes us most human? And the answer has to do with this, the relationship between our social cognition and our natural knowledge, and how our classification systems evolve from out of the collective intelligence of the group. The way that the shared social body metabolizes different dichotomies, different polarities, taking those polarities within itself, the social body, and then working with them through the evolution of language to reclassify, reorganize the natural world. We're wanting to explore more deeply how do we do that? And so, what are the specifics of this relationship between our social cognition and our natural knowledge, our knowledge of the natural world? Okay, and the first section that's going to explore this is called Sharing and Knowledge Distribution. And it has one, two, three paragraphs, which are quite long. And again, I'm using this bit of a tortured methodology today because I have to read out different parts of these paragraphs, which are quite academic, and then comment on them. So I have to request a lot of, it's not exactly poetic license, it's more like um, intellectual license. I don't know, because it can be hard to follow. Okay, so what is it about our social intelligence? Well, the evolutionary significance of social intelligence is that ultimately it improves food getting, mating, and therefore reproductive efficiency. Individual animals of many species learn to recognize different species and utilize their properties. Similarly, repeat discovery of the same properties by ecologically separated human groups is evidence for convergent patterns of organizing biological knowledge. However, what characterizes humans is how information about the natural world acquired by individuals is shared with others and transmitted intergenerationally through socially distributed storage and external memory supported through language. What characterizes humans is how information about the natural world acquired by individuals is shared with others and transmitted intergenerationally through socially distributed storage and external memory supported through language. So what this is saying is that our biological knowledge is organized into convergent patterns, meaning similar patterns in different cultures in different places. Or at least that's something that many different theorists argue for. There are these convergent patterns that organize our biological knowledge in many different cultural contexts. But that biological knowledge is not just organized into these convergent patterns, but that it's shared and stored externally in the social body. It's transmitted to other people and intergenerationally and stored in that social body. That's unique to humans. Okay, it goes on. But this does raise the issue of why, if culture, in the sense of socially transmitted practice, is common among many species, why it evolved so rarely into more elaborate patterns. This is why data on knowledge sharing, as documented in ethnobiological research, is instructive. Early attempts to collect data relied heavily on aggregate figures for numbers of organism names and the omniscient speaker-hearer assumption. We now know that biological knowledge does not exist in its totality in any one place or individual, that it is much more distributed, while its movement between individuals is rarely regulated by what we would normally understand as exchange. The exchange relations may improve access to resources. So what this is talking about is like like we were talking about this capacity to organize our natural knowledge, and there was this observation that like many different species do that actually. Like the social transmission of knowledge is like that can, I'm thinking of crows, elephants. They're all like this deeply social learning can be important to these species in different ways. So what is it about these patterns of the organization of natural knowledge among humans that is more elaborate? And part of the answer is it's pointing to distributed cognition and indeed collective intelligence. It's not about one individual storing all of that knowledge or being able to share it a lot. It's about this the movement of this information between the social body among the individuals. It's already quite specific, right? It's particularly about the social organization and reconstitution of our natural knowledge that allowed us to be most human. So it goes on. But for sharing of biological material and knowledge to be routinized and dependable, required the recognition of individuals as intentional agents. And arising from this, the development of those norms of trust that we now accept were crucial to the evolution of sociality itself, and which are now such an issue in the study of great apes, and critical for understanding the emergence of symbolic culture and language. The concept of sociality is further addressed by James in the same volume. Where knowledge is shared, there's always a tension between literal acceptance and distrust, as in those social relations, more generally, that are the context for material transactions and knowledge exchange. Among hunter-gatherers, as in most acephalous societies, there are fewer robust social means for establishing authority and for standardizing what is known and adjudicating in disputes than in complex centralized systems. So what this is saying is that in order to like share our knowledge of the natural world, we really needed to be able to trust each other. We really needed to share the sense of other people being an intentional agent, that someone has information that they are trying to share, that they would like to share, um, so that the sense of agency, the sense of someone else as an intentional agent, seems to um, act as a kind of it's a kind of empathic link. Um, so if we can't recognize that someone is an agent, has agency, that they have information of the natural world, for example, that they would quite like to share, then it's very difficult to trust that person. And so, yeah, when we're literally sharing knowledge among a group, the risk of deception is very high. Like it can be to people's great advantage to lie, to be dishonest. And so it seems that the not only was it our sharing, social sharing of our knowledge that made us human, but the relationship between, particularly, the empathic recognition of agency of others, our trust in those others, and the sharing of our social knowledge. So in order to be able to gain the benefits of this of social cognition, right, of distributed cognition and collective intelligence, we have to be able to recognize the agency of others, to empathically connect with them, and to share trust, which is basically based on whether what they share bears fruit, whether it's true. Like if they tell you, hey, there's no tiger down by the waterhole, and then you go there and there is a tiger, well, it's like they really sold you out. Um, yeah, so what we're starting to see here is the emergence of morality, the emergence of humanness, like in the sense of being humane, um, this capacity to trust in groups, to recognize the agency of others, by, I would say, recognizing oneself in someone else, and to share knowledge of the natural world. These all went together. Okay, one more paragraph here. It says, in understanding how distributed and shared cognition evolved, other parts of the body, in addition to the brain, were integral. Category mechanisms work through mapping, involving our whole bodies and personal histories. The evolution of the hand, in particular, and with it the tool, brought about a transformation in the relationship between hominins and their own body, a greater level of physical self-awareness and sense of self, arising from use of the hands in communication as sensory organs and through recognition of their manipulative capacity. The development of physical motor skills also improved the potential utility of biota and therefore encouraged selection for more sophisticated classification skills. Similarly, transmission was not simply the passing of information from one brain to another, but required complex interactive rediscovery. Okay, we can see here this undercurrent of um, this story is telling a story of using nature, right? And it's like this is what I would say is exactly the perspective of the left hemisphere. To um, gesture over toward Ian McGilchrist if you don't know who he is. Um, basically, hands, which we started to use a whole lot more after we became bipedal, I would suggest, had a huge effect on our cognition, our physical self-awareness and sense of self, but also in terms of the capacity to manipulate the world even. So this to me is like this really came out in the invention of tools. And again, I've talked, I think, in episode 12 in the series on psychological types, how if I refer to Schmachtenberger for a minute, it was the development of early stone tools that led to this breaking of the co-selection dynamics between humans and nature, where as soon as we had stone tools, we were essentially able to go to all different parts of the earth and overhunt the fauna that were there, leading to these arms races on weapons technology and runaway dynamics that we see today. And so this, if we can recognize that there is a kind of left hemispheric um, technical intelligence that comes from the relationship between the use of the hands and tool making, we can see how the effect of this is a kind of it's a mindset of it's a mindset of yeah, it's the mindset of the left hemisphere. I was going to say it's a mindset of engineering, but that's not quite right. Um, it's this relating to the world as if it's inanimate, as if it's inert, as if it's to be moved around, as if it's a um, composed of dead, lifeless objects to be manipulated. This is very left hemispheric, and it comes out of this relationship between tool making and the use of the hands. Yeah, I talked at length in again that series on psychological types that I mentioned, particularly in those episodes 12 and 13, I believe, about how if we recognize this, then we can see how this not only contributed a great deal to the development of our humanness, right? But it can also run away in the wrong direction. So if our way of categorizing the world, if our way of organizing our social knowledge is um, overly influenced by the kind of mindset that comes from treating everything as if it's a tool, then we're unlikely to thrive and survive for very long. And I guess what I'm suggesting is that that is to an extent exactly what happened. And we have this, we've been talking about the way that the development of tools, the evolution of tool making and the kinds of changes to our sense of self and self-awareness that went along with that, how that much they would have affected our relationship with the world and relationship with each other. I think we're in a position to see from there. Um, it's so clear to me. It's fine to develop that capacity. Like that's an amazing capacity, right? We talked again in the first episode here about, and also in this episode, about how this technical intelligence has to be balanced with social cognition. The kind of intelligence which is social intelligence, which has to do with the sharing of knowledge and resources, is very different from the kind of intelligence which is about technical facility with the world, the left hemisphere, basically. And so I want to talk about, I would suggest that um, there was a kind of runaway feedback loop between the technical intelligence of tool making and the part of the brain that creates that. It has to do with dividing and separating and categorizing the world in quite rigid categories of um, objects to be used or not. And I mean, where the whole point, the core of our humanness was not only was yes, making tools, right? But it was the integration of that capacity within the social cognition of the group, within the capacity to uh, reweave category boundaries, to reorganize our knowledge, to decide, hopefully, with wisdom, um, if and when to use tools and if and when to make them. Okay, I think I'm going to pause this here. So, what we've been talking about is the evolution of our social intelligence and a little bit more of the different elements that went into that were unique to humans, namely our capacity to share with others, to recognize the agency of others, to trust others, to reorganize our knowledge ongoingly, to give rise to these elaborate emergent patterns of the organization of our natural knowledge, and to transmit those patterns, to transmit that knowledge intergenerationally between generations. This is the core of human culture. This is what culture is about. We saw how that particularly had to do with collective intelligence, particularly had to do with the distributed cognition, not in one individual, but among the whole group. We saw that agency, trust, and this knowledge sharing really went together because the risk of deception is so high. And I think what I want to focus on at the end here is the double sense of the word manipulative. If we see how the development of the relationship between technical intelligence and tool making, when we started using the hands to literally manipulate the world, we can see how unless people are really, really well socialized, included in the social intelligence of the group, then that capacity to manipulate the world can become the capacity to manipulate other people as if they were an object when they're not, when they're actually an agent that has intention, when they're actually a being. And so this leads to a kind of a way of categorizing that is excessively left hemispheric, and where the left hemisphere is sort of out of proportion, out of alignment with the cultural roots from which those tool making capacities ultimately emerged from. Yeah, so not only did when we started to use our hands a whole lot more, not only did that have a huge effect on our um, physical self-awareness and our sense of self, our communication, our sensory organs, but they also really changed our, particularly in combination with tools, they um, went along with the risk of it getting us stuck in these a quite rigid, objectifying way of categorizing the world and other people. So the idea would be to um, find out how, like, what was the, if that's a kind of this runaway dynamic that I've described, well, if we wanted to restore the balance, let's say, um, by bringing the rest of human cognition sort of up to speed, or like by presenting a cultural practicum, like, hey, how do we do this human thing to better regulate our tool use, to better integrate the left hemisphere? How do we do that? Well, starting to get a better sense of um, how we did this shared knowledge sharing, um, recognition of agency, how we came to trust each other, how we used our language and our memory. This is what we're going to be talking about.